The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Well, the March for Science was over the weekend, organized sort of the main march in Washington, D.C. There were marches all over the country, all over the world, actually. Reportedly 600 satellite marches coinciding with Earth Day. And there was a big march here in Boston. There was a big one in Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Chicago. Our producer, Noah Ferguson, actually attended the D.C. march and took a bunch of video there, which we're going to show our television audience. And this was a supposedly nonpartisan march, but there was a ton of anti-Trump stuff, and it was sort of to be expected. And there were people criticizing this march by saying, well, this is going to make science look partisan or political because there's going to be this undertone of anti-Trump rhetoric. But the problem is that science has been made a partisan issue, and this is evidenced by all the anti-science policy and sentiment by Donald Trump and the Republican Party. The point of these marches was sort of to support science and evidence-based research. And the context is you have an administration in the Trump White House that's cutting budgets to science agencies, removing climate change data, telling NASA that they can no longer do climate research. The list goes on. And what's most upsetting to me is that we even need a march for science. This is 2017. This is not, I don't know, whatever year you want to point to in the past. And we still have a significant portion of our country, of the planet too, but we're talking about the US right now, that resists science, that believes science is something you can have faith in, just like religion. And this is one of the most disturbing and problematic beliefs that's out there. I kept reading this comment, Pat, from many on the right about the marches. Protesters saying, oh, listen, or rather, those who were criticizing the protesters saying, the people marching, science is their religion. It could be just as wrong as to say, well, Christianity or Islam or Judaism it requires faith and is a religion. Science is their religion and they have faith in science. This needs to be called out, and everybody who's watching or listening to this needs to know how to react to that. Faith in science is a fundamentally bogus criticism. I have faith in Jesus as the Son of God is not the same as faith in the scientific method. And I think the term faith should not even be used in that sense. They are not even remotely equivalent. And first of all, what is faith, right? I mean, faith is believing something despite not having evidence for it. Because if there was evidence for it, you wouldn't need faith. There is nothing in science and the scientific method that is like faith. It's the opposite. Science has this process, Pat, of checks and balances, whereas faith doesn't. Scientific assertions are all tentatively true based on the evidence we have until the built-in corrective mechanism of science points in another direction. When's the last time, Pat, that you heard someone say, I have faith that Jesus is the Son of God and was born to a virgin, but that's a tentative belief until something comes along and points in another direction.
And the whole idea behind religion is that it's static and unchanging. How the holy books were written centuries and millennia ago are the same as they are now.
That's right. The Word of God is perfect and irrevocable and unchanging. And if you go to your clergy and you say, hey, you know what? I'm doubting my belief in God. What do they point to? They tell you to study the Bible. This is what's called a closed loop of belief. There's no external check or balance. Scientific assertions are not only completely open in terms of how they have to fit in with everything else we know about the world, debunking or correcting scientific assertions is not only possible, but it's welcome. When you have someone in the scientific community correct a previously held assertion, the more important that previous assertion was, the more notoriety that goes to the people who correct the assertion. That's the opposite. Who's out there in the religious community trying to figure out a more accurate version of Noah's Ark?
Right, and scientific facts are true whether or not you believe in them or agree with them.
Right.
And it's not like this was a protest about abortion rights or gay rights or the Second Amendment where there's two sides to the argument. You can have a legitimate debate. I mean, this is going on now.
We need to be pushing back against the idea that science is a system of faith, just like religious beliefs, because they have nothing in common. We shouldn't even need something like the March for Science, but we need it. And one area where this is hugely damaging is what Pat said with regard to climate change, which science tells us is real and is impacted by human activities on Earth. Donald Trump talked about Earth Day, which coincided with the March for Science, didn't even mention climate change, period. I mean, even George Bush mentioned climate change. Quote from Trump, "This is April 22nd as we observe Earth Day. I hope that our nation can come together to give thanks for the land we all love and call home." It's abundantly clear Trump has no idea what Earth Day even is from that, but that's no surprise. Just because you acknowledge climate change also doesn't mean you have to do X or Y in terms of policy. There's a lot of people on the right, Pat, who just want to negate human influence on the climate because they believe if we accept human influence on the climate, that means we have to specifically do X or Y legislatively. No, you could accept the science and say, I don't care.
Right. There are plenty of libertarians, I think, who would accept the science but say we shouldn't take an active role in trying to mitigate those effects.
Right.
That at least is intellectually honest. I mean, it's the wrong thing to do,
Absolutely.
but it's consistent in that least.
No doubt. There is no doubt about that. And that is part of why you see so many on the right. There's many on the right who don't genuinely, in their heart of hearts, disbelieve the science on climate change, but they don't want to acknowledge it because they believe that there's sort of an obvious legislative path forward. And you know what? They might be right? I mean, if we acknowledge what we're doing to the climate, most people might agree about what it is that governments should do to fix it. Libertarians might not like it. Small government conservatives or big oil might not like it. But we can still accept the science and then argue about what the policy should be.
It's one of those things where ignorance is bliss, too. And I mean, the topic of climate change has really come around for decades.
Yeah.
At this point, and maybe at first the science wasn't completely there, so people were skeptical at the time.
Sure.
And maybe they just don't want to come around to it at this point.
Absolutely. So yes, the March for Science, very successful. I am distraught about the fact that this is even something that we need. Donald Trump's Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has declared that the arrest of Wikileaks founder Julian Assange is now a, quote, priority. CNN reported that the U.S. Justice Department has been preparing charges against Julian Assange, who's probably most well known for, well, I would say most well known for facilitating the publishing of all of those classified documents in 2010 that were leaked by Chelsea Manning. More recently, for the DNC hacking leaks during the 2016 election. And Assange has been living at the Ecuadorian embassy in London since 2012, evading charges related to both WikiLeaks and sexual assault from different parties. Republicans have been endlessly hypocritical about WikiLeaks. They condemned the 2010 U.S. military leaks, but then they praised WikiLeaks during the 2016 DNC leaks, including Donald Trump's praise of that. Trump actually told CNN back in 2010, talking about WikiLeaks and Chelsea Manning, quote, "I think it's disgraceful. I think there should be like death penalty or something." But then last year, Trump said he loves WikiLeaks, probably because they helped him in the 2016 election. But the Justice Department seems to have a sort of different opinion about Assange at the moment. And as soon as I saw this, I thought, it's yet another attempt to appear neutral about something related to Russia. Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, told a press conference in El Paso on Thursday, quote, "We are going to step up our effort and already are stepping up our efforts on all leaks. This is a matter that's gone beyond anything I'm aware of. We have professionals that have been in the security business of the United States for many years that are shocked by the number of leaks, and some of them are quite serious." We also have a quote from last week from CIA Director Mike Pompeo, who said in a speech, "It's time to call out WikiLeaks for what it really is, a non-state hostile intelligence service often abetted by state actors like Russia. Julian Assange has no First Amendment freedoms. He's sitting in an embassy in London. He's not a U.S. citizen." Now, Julian Assange's lawyer has said nobody's been in touch with us from the Justice Department. That doesn't mean they're not working on charges. Ecuador says it doesn't plan to extradite Assange anytime soon. The real important core issue here is that typically we see the leaker published. Chelsea Manning obtained these documents and gave them to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks published the documents. The punishment of the publisher is sort of a gray area with WikiLeaks, but it's also sort of a red line when it comes to the prosecution of publishers. We could say, well, listen, maybe WikiLeaks is not exactly like the New York Times in terms of the First Amendment protections that they have with regard to publishing documents like this. I don't know. I mean, you could differ on that, Pat, but still believe that they did not steal or violate protocol to obtain the documents. WikiLeaks received documents, and thus prosecuting WikiLeaks could signal some pretty important First Amendment concerns when it comes to the prosecution of media outlets. I don't think WikiLeaks is illegitimate because it published information that it got from someone that did something wrong. That really isn't the main concern. Newspapers like the New York Times and Washington Post do it all the time. WikiLeaks also isn't illegitimate because the person who gave them the information might have been doing it for reasons you don't like, right? You could disagree with why Chelsea Manning gave these documents to WikiLeaks. That doesn't mean WikiLeaks did anything illegal.
And I think WikiLeaks is actually legitimate because they will publish things that could be detrimental to both sides of the equation. And they got a lot of backlash because they released things that specifically harmed Hillary Clinton in this past election cycle. But that just could be because that's what they had.
I am mixed about that. Only because I agree with what you're saying in principle. At the same time, you know, we could say they need to vet the information properly. And the release of a lot of those Podesta leaks, they didn't really tell us much. And they actually did harm people. For example, James Alefantis, I believe the guy's name is, the guy who ran Comet Ping Pong, who suffered at the hands of conspiracy theorists because of all the Pizzagate stuff, right? Whoa. So I think that WikiLeaks does have a duty to vet newsworthiness to some degree, don't you think?
It's not as if Pizzagate was outright mentioned. If you look at the text of the Podesta things, they just claimed there were code words.
Yeah, right. I mean, it was used to further this entire Pizzagate conspiracy theory. So this is going to be a really important story to keep an eye on because,
What I'm saying is that we don't know if they had anything on Donald Trump specifically.
And chose not to release it. Right. Fair enough. No, I completely agree with you as far as that goes. If indeed we see the attempt to prosecute Julian Assange for what he did, this is going to be a red line when it comes to the war on whistleblowers and leakers, et cetera, because once you go beyond just individuals who stole classified information, you could make the judgment that, okay, it's worth it for me to leak these classified documents, secret documents that are I'm sort of bound not to make public, and I'm willing to suffer the consequences of that. Chelsea Manning could make that call. Any leaker or whistleblower could make that call. But to go to the next step and say news outlets or online publishers like WikiLeaks who receive information that they believe to be newsworthy, that they had no part in illegally obtaining, they could be prosecuted. To me, Pat, that's crossing a pretty significant red line here. And I would be concerned going forward about how this will influence media outlets, because imagine that there is prosecution of someone like Julian Assange. If you're then the Washington Post and you get from someone, the next Chelsea Manning, similar documents, now you might say, well, I used to think that I would be okay publishing this because I didn't obtain the documents illegally. I am just publishing them. You're going to think twice, and it is going to absolutely suppress what we are going to learn about what our government is doing. And
you can connect that to the Trump-Russia dossier where BuzzFeed and CNN reported on that directly.
Yep.
Are you going to turn around and punish them too, and not just the people who put together the dossier and released it to the public?
Probably. Yeah, you probably are, if this sort of line of reasoning continues. So I'm very, very concerned about this, and we'll see what happens. Send me your thoughts about this. I'm on Twitter at dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is John Crowley. John, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. This is viewer and listener supported media. I will update you about the YouTube ad boycott a little bit later in the show, but needless to say, We still need people to sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. We have a coupon code available. I voted 17. You can also make a contribution on Patreon at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. And lastly, if you ever shop on Amazon, remember to go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop. Then everything you buy sends us a little kickback, which is really, really useful to us, especially in light of what's going on. So I'm going to talk more on the bonus show about my vacation. Pat's going to talk about his vacation. During the break, I posted a bunch of pictures from my trip to Belgium on my Instagram account, which is david.pakman. And you know, a lot of people liked my posts, Pat, but a ton of people had criticisms. No matter what I post to Instagram, there are people who tell me I am doing something very, very wrong. So let's start with the first picture here. I'll describe the picture and then I'll tell you what was wrong. So this is a picture of me reading outdoors at a cafe in Brussels, Belgium, right? Not controversial, you would think. Criticisms that people sent in. I shouldn't be reading in the sun because I'm scrunching my eyes. Books that long, it's a very long book, are a waste of time. And reading on vacations is a waste of time, period. I should be doing other things. After all, I'm on a trip. I completely reject that. I like to have time to read books when I'm on a trip. This is Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy. It is a very, very long book. And I was enjoying myself reading. You know, why am I always doing something wrong in the eyes of people?
Well, perhaps the person accompanying you at the table there is bored because you have a book to read and maybe that person doesn't have anything for themselves.
No, my girlfriend had her own book. She was just taking a short break to take a picture of me. So anyway, there I was doing something wrong. Okay. Next picture that people really liked from my Instagram account. This is me at a brewery tour. Belgium has excellent beer. I did a couple of brewery tours. I thought, hey, here I am where they are storing the beer. People are going to like this. And people did. But no, there were criticisms, Pat. People saying, David, those don't look like beer barrels. They look like wine barrels. People don't age beer in barrels like that. Well, this brewery did. This brewery did. Some people commenting saying, David, drinking is bad. You shouldn't be drinking at all. And other people saying, David, Belgian beer isn't even that good. German beer is better.
But you were in Belgium.
I wasn't going to go to any German breweries when I was in Belgium. And then lastly, people really liking this, I went to Belgium. I had the famous Belgian frites. We know them as French fries here. The criticisms were I went to the wrong frites place. How you can tell from this picture, I don't know. Fried foods are bad for you. And Belgian frites are typically fried in duck fat, so they aren't vegetarian. I actually don't know if that's true. I didn't inquire about that. And lastly, that ketchup is a lame topping, even though it was curry ketchup, not regular ketchup. But mostly people seem to like it. I guess it's just someone will have a problem with what I'm doing, no matter what it is.
Yeah, because when you were reading a book, it looked as if you were working too hard on your vacation
Right.
and maybe looking a little bit too elitist.
Right.
And now you're drinking and eating fried foods. So you're trying to get balance at least.
Yeah, but clearly I did everything wrong on this vacation. Anyway, I'll talk more about the trip. We'll hear about Pat's excellent adventure on the bonus show as well. And you can follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Okay, what's the latest with the YouTube advertiser boycott? It has been nearly 2 weeks since I last talked to you about this. On March 31st, we had a new YouTube advertising algorithm rolled out by YouTube. The reason? Supposedly, all sorts of ads were showing up next to racist videos on YouTube. The truth is, yes, it happened anecdotally, but across billions of hours of videos watched, the truth is that the YouTube ad algorithm was actually always too strict, not allowing us to make money on videos that were not hateful or offensive. And this completely shut down our YouTube ad revenue by 99.9%, okay? The last update was from April 11th. At that point, we were 12 days into the ad crisis, and we were basically making nothing on YouTube, which represents 40 to 50% of our revenue. Crisis, existential threat to the show. So then what happened during vacation? April 12th and 13th, we saw a slight uptick in YouTube ad revenue. And I started thinking, Pat, we're out of the woods. YouTube is fixing it. It's all going to happen. It's going to be fantastic. But then April 14th through the present, it has fallen off a cliff again. Now, for comparison, before the crisis, usually for every 10 videos watched, 6 ads were shown, right? So, one person watches 10 videos or 2 people watch 5. For 10 videos, 6 ads were shown. During the vacation, we were down from 60% to 7% of the videos were showing ads. Also, each video play each ad play was earning way less than it had been previously. Before I told you that we earned about a fifth of a penny for each ad that played, that was down to about a tenth of a penny. So if you do the math, 7% monetization rate, paying half of what it was, means we're at about 3.5% revenue on
So
YouTube.
it looked as if there was an uptick, but if you delve into the numbers, it's just kind of a facade.
It lasted 2 days and then things crashed again. Now, one thing that did happen during the break, which was a positive development, is that the New York Times published an article about how the David Pakman Show was being hit by the YouTube ad boycott. The article is by Amanda Hess. It's called How YouTube's Shifting Algorithms Hurt Independent Media. Has anything come of that? Well, YouTube is telling us they might have some good news for us soon. But they also said that the week that we had 2 days of a slight recovery and then a total crash. So honestly, I don't know at this point. I genuinely don't know if we're ever going to get the revenue back.
It was a great article, too, and I think really will grab a lot of attention to this issue. And even though the New York Times is considered one of the corporate media outlets, it was actually critical of the corporate setup that we have going on in the mainstream media.
No, it was well done.
Yeah, very well done.
Amanda Hess did a great job. And so in the wake of this, we're still trying to replace that revenue. So there's 5 really easy ways that you can help us replace that revenue. Okay. Number 1, membership. You go to davidpakman.com/membership. Just get a membership. Okay. If the prices strike you as high, use the coupon code IVoted17. Patreon. We're trying to get to 2,000 patrons. We are about 3/4 of the way there. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. You can donate any amount you want. Just throw $1 a month at our Patreon. That's all that you need to do to make up for what we were, much more than what we were making off of an individual viewer on YouTube. Number 3, if you ever shop on Amazon, go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop. 4, if you have YouTube Red, just watch our videos. We get a cut of your YouTube Red subscription fee. And number 5, get gear at davidpakman.com/gear. So the good news is the Patreon donors are accumulating. This is a cumulative process. I do want your help keeping it going. As of this morning, we had, what was the number? 1,467 patrons so far. That's really great. Even if you only throw in $1, that's a really, really good thing. Number 2 good news is that members are signing up. Of course, to sign up, you go to davidpakman.com/membership. You hit the red sign up button. And then on the second sign up page, there's a coupon code. And you can use the coupon code IVoted17 if you want. And last thing, I still plan to do an entire show with my hair uncontrolled, as I published a picture of to Instagram a couple of weeks ago. If and when we get to 2,000 patrons, Pat, I will do a show with my hair like this, no matter what the consequences are with our broadcast affiliates.
You know, I'm willing to do some crazy hairstyle as well.
Really?
I don't know what it'll be.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Something, though.
Would you dye your hair?
I think I would just spike it all up into one Cindy Lou Who type thing.
Into a what?
You know, like the Dr. Seuss character.
Oh, okay. I was never a Dr. Seuss guy growing up.
Okay.
I'm sure that will resonate with many in our audience.
Of course.
I'm foreign, so I didn't really have Dr. Seuss
Understood.
in Argentina. Remember that story we did about Donald Trump potentially showing early signs of dementia and or Alzheimer's? Speculation about Donald Trump from the mental health community is actually surging above and beyond that. There are psychiatrists at a conference at Yale University who said a few days ago that Donald Trump has a, quote, dangerous mental illness and is unfit to be president. The group of psychiatrists said that Trump is, quote, paranoid and delusional, and that it's their duty to caution the public that Trump's psychological instability is likely a danger to the country. Here's a quote from James Gilligan, a psychiatrist at NYU. I've worked with some of the most dangerous people our society produces, directing mental health programs in prisons. I've worked with murderers and rapists. I can recognize danger from a mile away. You don't have to be an expert on danger or spend 50 years studying it like I have in order to know how dangerous this man is. Another quote from Dr. John Gartner of Johns Hopkins University Medical School. He's an expert on personality disorders. He said, quote, we have an ethical responsibility to warn the public about Donald Trump's dangerous mental illness, going on to say that Trump is displaying narcissism, delusion, and grandiosity, and started displaying it even on his first day in office. Remember when he asserted that he had some kind of record largest inauguration crowd in history. An online petition has been created by Dr. Gartner imploring that Donald Trump be removed from office. And it's not just a vague thing. It says, listen, based on Article 4 of the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, the president will be replaced if they are, quote, unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. However, you need Congress to agree that that's the case. And I don't see that happening anytime soon, Pat, no matter how wacky or erratic Donald Trump's behavior is.
I think there could be impeachment proceedings put forward by Republicans on other issues, but his mental health is certainly not one of them.
I and others have criticized mental health professionals in the past for publicly making assessments about others' mental health, because protocol in psychiatry is you don't diagnose individuals that haven't been examined in person by you. Dr. Gartner responded to that criticism specifically, saying research actually shows that the psychiatric interview is the least statistically reliable way to make a diagnosis. And Yale Medical School has said that these mental health experts were discussing whether there are other ethical rules that override the tradition, such as it's really a big problem if the president is mentally unstable.
And I think normally you say that about someone who you have very little information about. There's hours and hours of Donald Trump speaking off the cuff most of the time. Of course, sometimes he speaks with a veneer in front of him, but most of the time he's just ad-libbing and speaking his mind. So there's plenty of content that you can sample from.
People wrote to me about that. People wrote to me and said, listen, David, the thing I should know, my dad's a psychiatrist. A good psychiatrist should be able to spot some of what we're talking about through the TV screen anyway, since these are the types of personality, these are the types of traits that are behavioral and observable. I guess the only counter would be, well, everything you see Trump do on TV is acting. But I think we have a hard time believing that that's the case.
And I'm sure even though these doctors disagree and think that maybe he has a mental condition of some sort, Harold Bornstein takes the other opinion and probably believes that Donald Trump's mental health is the best out of any president in history.
I was thinking, imagine if Trump subjected himself to a psychiatric evaluation, and then that doctor puts together a letter similar to the one that we got from Dr. Bornstein. Trump has absolutely the best memory. He is the most stable person emotionally that I've ever interviewed, of all presidents, by the way. I actually don't think it's a bad idea, though, for presidential nominees to undergo some kind of a publicly disclosed psychiatric evaluation. I mean, don't you think that, as well as medical records and taxes, should just be the basic package so we can really decide with all the evidence whether someone is fit to be president of the United States?
Perhaps. I mean, when it comes to tax returns, that's just always been a matter of tradition. We haven't had to urge anyone to do it by law.
Yeah.
We've always had these three basic qualifications for becoming president, and to add a few more, I think that would be okay.
I think we need to add a few. And I know that people will say, well, David, it will end up being applied in a discriminatory way, et cetera. I don't know. I mean, when people talk about requirements to be parents, I immediately have red flags go off where I say that is going to be applied in an absolutely discriminatory way. If presidents just have to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, I don't know that we're going to be limiting the pool that drastically, other than most of the people who are currently our elected officials. We'll still have many, many people in this country who would be qualified to serve.
Well, just think, even to get your driver's license, there's things that you have to go through, tests and vision checks and everything else.
Yeah.
But to be the top public servant in the country and the most powerful person on the planet,
indeed,
you don't need much.
Doesn't make sense to me. Doesn't make sense. Discuss this with us on our Reddit discussion forum, davidpakman.com/REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It appears that after the sad, shameful sinking of the sinister and sanctimonious Republican replacement for Obamacare, known briefly as the American Health Care Act, Republicans are going to propose another replacement plan, and it's really, really bad. It's even more cruel, actually, than the first one in some ways. This new plan, according to a study that is now being released, could see premiums rise for people who are already sick which will lead some of them to no longer be able to afford health insurance. Obamacare has a provision that prevents states from charging people with pre-existing conditions more money. One of the specific provisions of this new Republican plan is a waiver which states would be able to seek to get rid of that restriction so that insurance companies within their state would be able to go ahead and start jacking up premiums on people with pre-existing conditions. And it would also put back in the Obamacare requirement that was gone from the American Health Care Act, which requires insurers to cover what are called essential health benefits. This includes emergency room visits and regular doctor visits. Sounds like great news, right? Well, sort of, because it would also put in a provision that allows states to get a waiver to opt out of that as well. There's a study from the Center for American Progress on how much more people with certain conditions would have to pay. The surcharge in the middle column represents the additional premium charges that insurers are projected to add to coverage of each condition annually. And the numbers are shocking. For example, metastatic cancer, over $140,000 in surcharges. Lung, brain, and other severe cancers, nearly $73,000 in surcharges. These findings are based on national averages. So, they're going to vary slightly from state to state, but they're guidelines. You could say, well, but David, that's the Center for American Progress. That's a leftist group. We can't trust their numbers. The nonpartisan Kaiser Family Foundation actually looked at the numbers and said, actually, they're pretty plausible. Meanwhile, the new Republican plan would keep in place that phase out of Medicaid expansion that was proposed in the American Health Care Act. That would result in 14 million fewer people on Medicaid. I mean, just a total and absolute disaster. How is making coverage too expensive for people who are already sick going to be good for anybody? Those people will be worse off, and everyone else will be too, because those people will have to start going to the emergency room for primary care treatment, not paying their bills, at least some of them, and then those unpaid bills will get averaged in to everybody else's health insurance premium. So we're all going to end up paying for that.
Well, Trump has long said that if his American Health Care Act failed, then he would just let Obamacare fail on its own merits. And of course, that's not going to happen by itself, but if he takes away things like the Medicaid subsidies from the individual states, if he does tactics like this, it very well could. And I think he's hoping that people would blame Obama and the Democrats. But at this point, that's on you.
I hope you're right that people would recognize that. I am not yet completely comfortable saying that. And I still think that there will be an attempt to push the blame. Hey, listen, Obamacare didn't do well. Yes, I mean, because we defunded it and modified provisions and started allowing states to opt out of whichever parts of it they didn't like. But it's all Obamacare that failed, right? And unfortunately, as transparently bogus as that is, you know that there are going to be committed Trumpists that will fall for it. And they'll say, hey, it is Obamacare after all.
It's possible, but also Trump's American Health Care Act had a 17% approval rating. So there's plenty of people who, although they disagreed with Obama and Obamacare, weren't on board with his new plan.
Yeah, fortunately. That gives me some hope that there are people who are able to look at some of these issues objectively, or at least somewhat more objectively than just, hey, Trump winning, whatever. Corruption alert. Cronyism alert. Dow Chemical makes a lot of money from chlorpyrifos, diazinon, and malathion. Okay, there are a couple of problems for Dow Chemical, though. Chlorpyrifos. Do you have any idea how to say that?
Oh, geez.
Chlorpyrifos?
This is tough.
Chlorpyrifos? I don't know.
Chloropyrifos. Chloropyrifos.
I think you're putting an extra O in there based on my reading of it, but why not at this point? Just throw in whatever vowels you want. Chlorpyrifos was originally derived from a nerve gas developed by Nazi Germany. That sounds bad. That's not actually the biggest problem for Dow Chemical, which says a lot. Studies by federal scientists have found that chlorpyrifos, diazinon, and malathion are harmful to almost 1,800 critically threatened or endangered species. That's bad news. However, there's some good news on the horizon for Dow Chemical. First of all, the EPA, which would normally be charged with or tasked with dealing with this, is now run by a climate change skeptic, very friendly to companies like Dow Chemical. His name is Scott Pruitt. Last month, he said he was going to reverse an Obama-era effort to bar the use of Dow's chlorpyrifos pesticide on food after peer-reviewed studies found that even small levels of exposure can hinder child brain development, which is a pretty serious thing. But it gets even better for Dow Chemical than just having Scott Pruitt in the EPA. Their CEO, Andrew Liveris, is good buddies with our president, Donald Trump. Dow Chemical spent $13 million on lobbying last year, and they also made the very nice, generous, beautiful donation of $1 million to pay for Donald Trump's inauguration. And now lawyers representing Dow Chemical and two other companies that manufacture some of the other pesticides in question have sent letters to the head of the EPA, as well as the head of the Department of Commerce and the head of the Fish and Wildlife Service, saying, listen, why don't you set aside the results of these studies, saying that the studies are fundamentally flawed? Sure, set them aside. Nothing to see here, right?
I love to see their critiques as to why these studies are flawed, if they're going after the methodology or if they want to propose one of their own studies, because just to ask them to put it aside makes it seem as though, yeah, that's actually true what they have to say, but we don't want the public to hear about it.
They do have some studies they funded, which, very surprising, I know, show that these chemicals are far less damaging than the nonpartisan studies showed them to be. What's the solution to this, though? I mean, there's no simple or narrow solution. We obviously need total campaign finance reform, but that alone isn't going to fix the broader issue. We need stricter ethics rules. We need stricter conflict of interest rules, but that's not going to be enough. Do we need, as we spoke about earlier, some more specific qualifications to be president, more than just being old enough and being a natural born citizen? I just don't know what they would be in order to prevent this type of garbage from going on. Do we go to the popular vote and fix gerrymandering once and for all? None of these ideas that I'm presenting individually would solve the rampant crony corruption that we have, but maybe altogether they would.
All of those things sound nice, but it would also just be great to have an environmental protection agency that protects the environment and looks out for the public and for wildlife and actually tries to restrict corporations from doing whatever they want.
It's such a problematic and huge issue that it's difficult to even get my mind around how much would need to change to fix the corruption that is just inherent in our system. And on our Reddit discussion forum, on our Facebook page, people talk about issues of corruption a lot. And it's just such a monster. And at the bottom of it, Pat, why would the people who use the current system to get into power fundamentally change it? That seems like they're acting against their own best interests, which our elected officials rarely do.
Right. It's one of those things that you'll never be able to solve completely, but that doesn't mean that you can't take active measures to curb it, right?
Yeah, I guess. Although we don't see much of an impetus for anybody doing that as well. Sad. Low energy and sad, I would say. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show, davidpakman.com/membership. Check out either or both. Support the program. This is independent alternative media.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, during our vacation, Bill O'Reilly, the very popular right-wing TV personality who for the last 21 years has been hosting the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News, was fired amid a disgraceful sexual harassment scandal. And Fox News in general is quickly becoming pretty notorious for sexual harassment scandals. Remember that the last round of sexual harassment allegations at Fox News were less than a year ago, when a long list of women came forward accusing Fox News CEO Roger Ailes of sexual harassment. It resulted in Ailes being forced to resign in shame. At the beginning of April, a New York Times investigation discovered that 5 women who work or worked for O'Reilly or appeared on his show over the course of many decades had been paid off by O'Reilly or by Fox to stay quiet about their claims, which ranged from just verbal abuse to sexual comments, unwelcome sexual advances, as well as phone calls from O'Reilly where the women said it sounded like he was masturbating while on the phone with them. Altogether, these women were paid about $13 million not to sue Bill O'Reilly over these incidents. And a few days after this came out, on April 5th, Dr. Wendy Walsh, who's a recurring guest on the O'Reilly Factor, also came forward with allegations against O'Reilly and recorded her call to the Fox complaint hotline. Take a listen to this.
Thank you for calling the 21st Century Fox alert line provided by Navex Global. If you wish to report a concern, please press 3. For other options, press 4.
Could you please give me the primary reason for your report?
Yes. In 2013, I experienced sexual harassment as a job applicant at Fox News Channel by an employee named Mr. Bill O'Reilly.
Right.
And when he turned around to find me, he said, "No, let's go to my suite." And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do that." And he said, "Oh, okay." So we went into the bar, and very soon he became hostile. He said insulting things to me.
Yeah. So this went on. 21st Century Fox received enormous backlash for initially standing by O'Reilly during past allegations. Over 50 companies pulled their ads on the O'Reilly factor, though, and numerous women at Fox News expressed doubt as to whether Fox News is committed to maintaining a safe and healthy work environment for women. The public pressure began, and ultimately, Bill O'Reilly, while he was on vacation, actually, Fox sent out a statement saying Bill O'Reilly is not going to be returning to the Fox News channel. They sent this out to their employees internally, saying that they did a thorough and careful review of the allegations. Pat, I'm devastated by this. Who's going to fight back against the war on Christmas now that Bill O'Reilly isn't at Fox News anymore? That's just going to be waged completely unfettered.
Tucker Carlson's going to have to take over with that regard. And notice how this wasn't really much of an issue as Fox News was concerned until advertisers started pulling their commercials off. The numerous allegations, the 15 years of this happening didn't matter. It was only when they started to take the commercials away.
Fellow sexual predator Donald Trump came to Bill O'Reilly's defense earlier this month. He said to the New York Times, quote, "I think he's a person I know well. He is a good person. I don't think Bill did anything wrong." Of course, Donald Trump would have no idea whether these allegations against O'Reilly are true, and he's only defending him because they are friends, and O'Reilly has always gone pretty easy on Trump. Here's the real issue, though, with the Trump defense of O'Reilly. As far as the public knows, Bill O'Reilly has only been accused of actual sexual assault once in 2004. Now, I'm obviously not minimizing anything that Bill O'Reilly might have done, but my point is, almost all of the sexual misconduct that O'Reilly has been accused of has been non-physical sexual harassment, and he was still fired as a television host. I'm not minimizing non-physical sexual harassment. I'm saying O'Reilly was fired for what is mostly non-physical sexual harassment. Meanwhile, the president of the United States, before he took office, had been accused by over a dozen women of physical sexual assault. His ex-wife accused him of rape. 7 women accused Trump of grabbing them and kissing them on the mouth. 2 women accused Trump of trying to put his hand up their skirts. 3 women accused Trump of grabbing their breasts. 3 women accused Trump of grabbing their buttocks. But not only that, Trump himself admitted that he sexually assaults women and grabs their genitals in a video that was public. So a political TV host is accused of sexual harassment and gets fired from his TV show, and he should have been fired. But then a guy who has a ton of actual sexual assault allegations against him, allegations that are all consistent, very believable, a man who admitted with his own mouth that, yes, he gropes women, he gets elected president of the United States.
It just goes to show that Bill O'Reilly and Donald Trump's supporters will defend them no matter what. If you took a look at Bill O'Reilly's ratings over the past few weeks, they were sky high. Now, normally he had been the top-rated cable news host.
Yeah.
But in the midst of those allegations and the scandal and the idea that maybe he could be fired from Fox News, they were at the highest point.
But wasn't that because of people's curiosity about whether maybe he would comment on the allegations? Like, I don't think people were all of a sudden, because of what was going on, thinking O'Reilly just does really great, incisive journalism, right? If it were me, I'd be wondering, is he going to comment on what's going on?
Maybe. And I think there's also just a lot of people rallying to his side. I guess now he's going to start some sort of podcast, but given that his average age of his audience is something like 70, they're not going to really tune into that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And there was a day a couple weeks ago where I guess the entire hour of somebody emailed me saying that there were like 3 ads or some small amount of ads. Like, it was very noticeable that tons of ads were just gone from the show.
His show got stopped 15 minutes early because they just couldn't fill the airtime.
Is that true?
Yeah.
And what did they go to? So like at 45 past the hour, they went to something else?
They went to a breaking news update of something that happened hours before that day, I think on the topic of Syria, but it was certainly not breaking news.
Stunning. I missed a lot when I was on vacation. That is absolutely amazing. Multiple polls now tell us that Donald Trump's approval rating at the 100-day mark is the worst since 1945. 2 polls released yesterday, a Washington Post ABC poll, 42% approval for Trump. An NBC poll, very similar, 40% approval for Donald Trump. There's often sort of a honeymoon phase at the start of a presidency. Didn't happen for Donnie Boy. We thought maybe that the Syria bombing would cause a bit of a resurgence in Trump's approval rating, and it kind of did. I mean, we can't necessarily say it was because of that, but we saw a slight uptick in Trump's approval from those lows of 36, 37% since the Syria bombing. There's an argument to be made that were it not for the Syria bombing, that Trump's approval rating might have sunk even lower. But compared to other presidents, Trump is really not doing well at the 100-day mark. Take a look at this. Donald Trump, as I mentioned, according to the NBC poll, at 40%. At the 100-day mark, President Obama was at 61%, more than 50% higher approval than Donald Trump. George W. Bush at 56%, and Bill Clinton at 52%. You actually have to go back to 1945 to find approval ratings this low during a first term. I continue to find these numbers shocking, Pat. The shock being that the numbers are this high. I mean, it is utterly embarrassing to me that 40 or 42% of the country sees what Donald Trump is doing and says, I approve. I think it's a good job that he's doing. And a lot of that support is coming disproportionately from white, non-college educated men, which is, apparently the group that is going to be immobile in terms of moving support away from Trump.
And you have to go all the way back to 1945. I mean, the whole reason that Harry Truman was unpopular from the outset was because no one knew who he was. FDR had been president for 12 years, and he was replaced by this random haberdasher from Missouri.
Yeah.
So the reason why he was unpopular was because nobody knew who he was. Donald Trump, everyone knows who he is, and no one likes him.
Yeah, it's very clear that there's a lot of people who aren't liking him, although his core supporters, seemingly unfazed. Who has Trump helped so far? What geopolitical situation has Trump improved? What domestic issues has Trump had a positive influence on? The facts don't matter. To really appeal to people, you have to appeal to their morality or their sense of justice. Whoa, I almost knocked my water over. I'm getting so agitated here. Or in some other more visceral way, because the fact checking is not going to change this, right? Trump has been a disaster and he has 40% approval. That's the disturbing part. Not that he's so low in approval. It's that 40% still say, I like what he's doing.
And the top accomplishment that he cited from his first 100 days was the appointment of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
All he had to do was pick from a list of names and get the Senate to confirm his pick. And even then, they had to use the nuclear option to do it.
Right. Is that even an accomplishment for Trump, when basically what he's proved to us is that somebody gave him a list of names and he was able to pick one? He was able to draw a circle around a piece of paper somebody handed him and say, this is the person we're going to select.
It's better than an executive order that was overturned or a piece of legislation that failed to even be brought to the floor of the House.
Yeah. There's another aspect to this, too, which is that many so-called Trump supporters, they likely wouldn't express positivity about what Trump has done if you really dig in with them. But there's probably Trump supporters who just like that progressives aren't happy with what Trump is doing. There's no doubt that there are Trump supporters who see progressives complaining about Trump, and that makes them happy and makes them support Donald Trump, which is both sad and low energy, I have to tell you.
It's also one of these things where you don't want to admit you're wrong and claim that you made a mistake by voting for this monster.
Absolutely. No doubt
That's a big
about
part
that.
of it.
We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I don't completely understand. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David Pakman. This is Jack down here in Texas, and I think you're doing a great job, buddy.
Thank you.
For a young guy. And you're going to grow up and be a great Democrat someday. Hang in there. Keep doing a good job. Bye.
What does that mean? Someday I'll grow up to be a great Democrat. Number one, I've never been a Democrat. And number two, I don't look forward to someday being a Democrat. I've been independent, or as it's called in Massachusetts, I think it's unregistered or something like that.
Unaffiliated.
Unaffiliated. since I've been 18 years old. I don't know what this caller is talking about.
And you do pretty well for a young guy, too.
Right.
But I mean, I guess it's a compliment. You should
Yeah.
just take it as a compliment.
I guess so. I just don't know what the caller is suggesting about. Someday, I might be able to be a good Democrat.
Maybe he knows that you're unaffiliated in the state of Massachusetts, but one day you'll have the courage to check that box next to the word Democrat.
I guess so. Are you affiliated or are you unaffiliated?
I actually am, and I probably shouldn't be. Not like I would vote for a Republican. I can't imagine if I had the choice that I would choose the Republican ballot.
Wait,
but
you are what? You are a
I am
registered
affiliate.
Democrat.
I'm a registered Democrat.
Got it. Okay. Very good. All right. Well, listen, on the enough about Pat's voter registration. On the bonus show today, my vacation stories, Pat's vacation stories. I will tell you about the week ahead. I will tell you about an inquiry I received from a media outlet in Russia, and a lot more. DavidPakman.com/membership is the one way to get access to the bonus show. You can also contribute to our Patreon fundraiser at patreon.com/DavidPakman Show. I'll talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.